you've ever asked yourself what would Dorian do, then this video is for you. It's going to be an extensive study into his outside passing. I'm going to try and structure it in such a way and leave timestamps in the description so that if you ever have problems with your passing, then you can come back and use this as a resource. But without understanding the concepts that underpin his game, it's all going to fall flat. I think the main thing that sets Dorian apart from other people is his unwillingness to accept any position where he's not controlling the tempo of the match. So let's say the guard player gets a grip on him, he's just going to rip out of there and reset the whole sequence. And within this, obviously, there's an element of cardio and fitness, but I think more important is understanding that as the top player, you're always more mobile than a guard player, and it's always easier for you to back out than it is for the guard player to back out. So then why would you accept any position where you're not ahead? And then alongside that, there's this very deliberate, organized approach to his jiu-jitsu, where he's not just going to try and jump past your guard with like a flying submission, but instead he's going to deal with the feet, then he's going to deal with the knees, and then he's going to look to control the hips. When you watch one of his matches, sometimes it can look like chaos, but it's actually just athleticism combined with intelligent and intentional jiu-jitsu, which isn't always the case. People approach seated guard like the match hasn't even started yet. They just wander in, legs everywhere, no plan. Congratulations, you've given the tempo to the bottom guy. He gets his grips, and now you're defending guard. And it's like, why? You wouldn't give someone an underhook in wrestling and then go, alright, let's wrestle. But jiu-jitsu guys do this constantly, and it makes no fucking sense. And obviously there's context for Tai doing this. He's 2 rounds down and he's run out of options. But it's still a good example of what not to do. Dorian's a wrestler. He knows that this first touch sets the whole pace. Just look at his stance. He's grip fighting with his hands. He's got his legs back. He's got his head forwards. He's ready to wrestle. It's not a lazy engagement for him from here. When you're seated, you can use your legs to disrupt the passing. You can follow movement. You're just generally more agile. Flat on your back though, you've given up that mobility and now you're just mostly reacting. So how does Dorian get you there? Well, it depends on your posture. So both hands in front, Dorian likes to push on the shoulder, pick up an ankle, and then steps out to an angle. And now you're falling to your back. So now situations where you don't have both your hands in front, so maybe you're posting on the mat. Okay, but now your hip's exposed, so he controls the hip and tries to walk around to north-south. So to stop him passing straight away, you have to fall to your back. And then there's the nasty option, so just push the face or push the shoulders. And it's not going to make you any friends, but this is part of why he's so good. It's an intensity most jiu-jitsu guys just aren't used to. Jiu-jitsu guys are used to donkey guard, or whatever this is. Dorian's kind of aggression isn't normal in the sport. Now, once people figure out that he wants you flat, they start bringing their heads forward. So the head is quite far in front of the hips here. They overcompensate this so they can't be pushed backwards. And Dorian's answer is the same thing every time. He snaps a guillotine. And it's usually not a real guillotine. It's this John Danaher-esque way of footballing the head.
Where instead of taking your hands to the floor, I take your head right across and I just football it into my hands like so.
And realistically, he's not getting this because you're going to fall back to defend it. This is where Dorian's advantage is biggest. Your whole back's on the floor, it's hard to move, and he's on his feet. And the guy's just going to sidestep constantly. And I think that this is probably his main tool in terms of controlling the tempo of the match. He's always just controlling your feet, throwing the legs by, and now he's flanking you and working towards your knees and hips. And I encourage you to count his side steps per minute in a match. And you think I'm joking, but really, it's just constant, endless pressure for the guard player to react to when he's doing this. Alongside the sidestepping, there's 3 specific passes that you're going to see Dorian hit over and over again. So first, he's going to be angled off to one side and outside your feet. He drops his shoulder inside the top knee, past the feet, past the knees, and he weaves his hand through to the near hip. Now his other hand goes to your head, or far hip. That's ideally what he's looking for, but his opponent is doing a good job of blocking his hand here. So now he's blocking your feet, knees, and hips, and he's anchored so you can't extend and get your legs back. And now it's just a matter of running around and finishing in north-south. And he does this all the time. And here he's doing it on DeAndre Corbe, but Corbe actually manages to get his other leg inside. But it doesn't matter because Dorian's just going to anchor to his armpit like this, and then he's just going to drive all his weight under Corbe's knees. Second pass, it's just a standard J point. So he starts from an angle where he's outside the feet again. He drops his elbow straight inside the hip, past the foot and past the knee. So now he's controlling the hip on the far side, and it's all about controlling the lower leg on the near side and then moving around to finish the pass. I think one of the main things that people do wrong when trying to do the J point is they try and enter from a head-on position with their opponent. Dorian creates a little bit of an angle first, and what this does is create the space at the hip where he needs to put his elbow in, which then controls the foot and the knee. And then he's even driving his head into his elbow just to try and prevent that leg coming over and retaining. And also look at how Dorian's controlling this near leg. He's shelving it with his knee. So he's trying to keep his knee quite close to the foot. This prevents the guard player from bringing his knee back inside and getting the foot back in front of Dorian. The guard player actually manages to get his foot back inside though, and Dorian uses this as a cue to jump to the other side and pass now. And third, he just runs around to north-south and dives in. So really he's just using this side stepping again to create an angle. And when the person's not very good at defending from north-south, he just dives into the knees, dives his head in, and finishes the pass. Here's another example. Dorian sidesteps to get the angle, and then he brings his hips in, which deflects the frames a little bit. Then Dorian's whole goal from here is to push the feet away and separate the knees from the body. And in my opinion, the guard player is going to make a mistake here, because right now he's using his foot as a hook, and that's keeping his knees close to his body. But he tries to kick that through to almost like a triangle position, so then he just gives up this space for Dorian to pass into. But most people will eventually try and sit up to alleviate the pressure, but in doing this you lose your frames and he gets to the hips. So it's the same pattern of him moving, you reacting, but he's already ahead. So slight tangent, but the Rotolos pretty much pioneered this way of passing back in 2021. But they weren't as fast as Dorian, but because of the length of their limbs, they could apply the same amount of pressure. And they would get the same response every time, where people's inability to retain effectively from north-south led them to sit up or turtle, and the Rotolos would expect this and then chain it right into submissions. So it's pretty cool how Dorian's been able to build on this and still use it effectively. Now watch Dorian's head across all of these passes. He's always leading with his head. Why? Well, I think there's a few reasons. It's hard to guillotine him when his head's buried into you the whole time. He's also pressuring your hips with his head, so feet, knees, hips, while the head's doing the hip work. And head forwards means he's not overextending his elbows. If he leads with the arms and overcommits, that's when you're going to get your counter. And I think here's a good example of Dorian not getting that good head position and ending up in trouble because of it. He doesn't get his head to the far side hip completely. Instead, it's like more so on the near side ribs. So this frees up the hips for the inversion and then allows the guard player to use his legs to threaten attacks. And when his head's forwards, his weight's not on his legs. This is part of why he's so fast. He's falling into you. And I think part of why Dorian is so successful with this style is that even if you do manage to stop a pass and you retain successfully, Dorian goes right in again instantly. You don't get 2 seconds to compose yourself. This is something that often catches people out of position, and if you lose your composure for half a second, well, now he's really ahead of you, and it's this scenario of you playing catch up to him that is actually the most exhausting part. He's able to have gravity on his side, constantly dive his way into you, whereas you're always scrambling to react. Shoulder inside, J point, north-south dive, that's the constant 3 passes he's doing. And because he's always cutting angles and pressuring your hips, you're going to high leg. He knows it. Any guard retention video will tell you the high leg is fundamental. You high leg because you're trying to retain. Don't high leg, well then you just get passed. So he fully expects it. The leg comes over, he takes a deep scoop grip, and then jumps to the other side. Similar to the elbow positioning that we talk about from north-south, it's the same thing here. Dorian can't stay in this position for long, where he's reaching with his right arm and his elbow is taken away from his body, because otherwise there's the risk of a spiral lock, like here. And he also needs to clear this back leg before he jumps. He doesn't want to get stuck on the trail leg. It's the same pattern every time. Runs the pass, you high leg, he scoops, and he jumps over. So okay, what if you just don't high leg? Well, then the only way to retain is probably bringing in a low knee shield like this. So if you do this, where you're just smashing your own knees together, and then he just takes advantage of that reaction instead. There's also situations where to avoid Dorian going to the outside, people lift their feet high. So Dorian can't grip the ankle so easy, but now, as the ankle has come above the knee, it just means that Dorian can go straight into stack passing. So this isn't really an effective way to stop Dorian. This is probably the main sticking point when I try and teach people Dorian style, is that they think, okay, Dorian's going outside, he's doing all this sidestepping and stuff. I have to imitate it. But as soon as the person playing guard brings their feet up so that their ankles are above the line of their knee, it's really hard to go outside. And it's much easier to just take like a scoop grip or control the ankles and go underneath the legs instead. This is a dilemma that Gordon talks about a lot.
Aaron eventually let his feet get pushed up above the head. Now's the perfect time to go Toriando. Anytime there's extension, Toriandos become very easy because the knees come away from the chest.
Alright, so that's the main stuff covered, but for me there's still questions left unanswered. Like, what if he can't get outside the leg straight away? What if an opponent takes a 2-on-1 grip? What about reverse Dela? If you take a 2-on-1, it's actually bad for you as the guard player. Both hands on the grip means your hands are committed to offense instead of being used as frames. And as you commit your legs to this 2-on-1 as well, trying to attack, Dorian rips out of the 2-on-1 and then just sidesteps around your legs again. And then let's say you take a 2-on-1 like Ethan does here, but he doesn't get his legs in a good place. Well, now there's no frames and there's no legs in place, so Dorian just smashes through. And it's Dorian's ability to make your grips a liability that makes him really world class, because you think that you're doing the right thing and then you get steamrolled. And for reverse Dela, sometimes Dorian tight passes, but usually it's this kind of head low, hips high pressure into the knee shield, trying to create this pressure so you open your legs and he can free his knee. Or something that he does consistently is this type of wide knee cut. So not the classic knee cut where you're trying to get your knee to the ground and pressure in. More so turning your hips out, cutting away where the legs can't follow, trying to free the leg and run around. So it's the same pattern again. Reset when it's messy, smash if they're opening themselves up, and then sidestep when you're free. And that's the whole thing. Tempo first, feet, knees, hips, and he's usually one move ahead of whatever you try and retain with. So how do you beat someone like Dorian? Well, people will say things like, let him into your guard and use his pressure against him. But these things just have no fucking bearing on reality. It's just things that people say that sound intelligent, but actually when you try and come to action them, it's just fucking impossible. Because okay, I'm going to let him into my guard. Right, well he's not running around me anymore, but now I'm just in a shit position that I'm not comfortable with playing guard from. But hey, at least he's in my guard and I've given him something and I'm using his own pressure against him. It just makes no sense to me. So instead, let's look at specific scenarios that Dorian has actually looked weak from. Dorian's usually pretty good at keeping his legs back and out of danger, but here as he tries to get outside the feet, his opponent manages to catch him, not only with his legs, but he also underhooks his lead leg now. So then they transition into this fishnet position, which turns into an extended scramble and a failed leg lock back take sequence. And I think there's a small detail that's important here. His opponent is playing guard on his elbow propped up to begin with. So as Dorian tries to move around now, he can fall down to his shoulder and crunch in towards his legs. So he's not fully extended now like if he was flat on his back. So his leg's in a bit of a stronger position that Dorian can't easily get around it, and instead his opponent can use it as a decent hook. And then this is from later in the match where Dorian tries to free his knee from a knee shield position. But as he does that, his opponent gets up on a single leg. And Dorian thinks, okay, this is a good time to go for a guillotine. The problem is, though, that his opponent does a great job of defending it. And if Dorian loses this guillotine, in the ADCC rules, that means he's going to give up the sweep points and he's going to lose. So instead, he has to belly out so he doesn't give up the points. But now his opponent just attacks his back and takes it. So that's two sequences then against the same opponent, where Dorian tries to pass, but gives up his legs, and his opponent capitalizes with some pretty unorthodox moves. But crucially, in both of them, it's this strong attachment to the legs that Dorian can't just rip out of, right? It's not just a flimsy 2-on-1. Instead, it's like this fishnet or hugging this single leg, and it's a solid attachment. But what if you don't want to come up on a single leg? Because that does open up Dorian to the wrestling game, and Dorian's a solid wrestler. Well, here's a few other options. Closed guard is always going to be a solid option, because now it puts Dorian in a position where he's reacting to you rather than the other way around. So it's a way of controlling the tempo of the match. Because to escape, Dorian has to stand up, and this will always give up his legs as an avenue of attack. So this is what we see Ethan do at CGI, and he gets a solid torque on Dorian's knee here. But Dorian's just very durable. He's not going to tap to something like that unless he has to. And it's the same thing that we see from his match with Taylor Pearman here. As Dorian's trying to get over this inside knee, Taylor locks up this rubber guard and then goes for an armbar. So it's not exactly close guard, but it's still coming from a very connected scenario. But again, we're just going to see Dorian's durability and his tenacity. He's just going to escape this armbar. And one thing that I think is really interesting is that from situations where Dorian isn't engaged, so like seated guard or when he's sidestepping, he's really good at keeping his legs back and his hands forwards. He has this awareness that the guard player wants to attach to his legs. However, we've seen that when Dorian gets a bit closer and gets a bit tighter in the guard, he seems to lose this sensitivity because he can't just disengage as easy anymore to protect his legs, and instead he's getting caught up in these positions. So for example here, Dorian can't just rip his left leg out, but also he isn't in a position where he's completely safe and dominant with his knee position, because he would much rather be stepped over this near knee. And then combining this with Dorian's proclivity to keep his head low, Taylor actually uses this, pushes his head even lower, and then uses that to lock up the rubber guard. Or maybe the answer is something like this, where you're actually interrupting one of Dorian's sequences. So he manages to get past the feet, get to an angle, and anticipates the high leg coming over, and then Dorian takes the scoop. But Pavel also anticipates that Dorian's going to do this, so it's a back and forth. So as Dorian takes that scoop, Pavel drops his hips flat to the mat straight away. So Dorian can't jump around the corner as easy, and he leaves his leg behind for Pavel to take a hold of. Right, so it's this sense of Dorian has to commit his legs forwards because he wants to commit to the scoop pass and jumping around. But because Pavel's already flattened his hips, this is harder for Dorian to do, and now Dorian's overexposed his legs to a counter. Pavel holds onto this leg for dear life and moves into a full sweep. So yeah, hope you enjoyed that. I learned a lot making this. If you have any questions, just let me know.